Few more pieces before we launch into two exposés this week. And I thought we would throw some light on a substance that's really covered too much, radon, and all about perspectives. Now, radon is a radioactive, colourless, odourless, tasteless noble gas occurring naturally as the decay product of radium, and it's one of the densest substances that remains a gas under normal conditions and is considered to be a health hazard due to its radioactivity. And its most stable isotope, 222Rn, has a half-life of 3.8 days. Now, due to its high radioactivity, it's been less well studied by chemists, but a few compounds are known, and radon is formed as part of the normal radioactive decay chain of uranium into 206Pb. Now, uranium has been present since the Earth was formed, and its most common isotope has a very long half-life of 4.5 billion years, which is the time required for 1/2 of the uranium to break down. But how would they know it takes 4.5 billion years? Because essentially what they're saying, according to their records anyway, uranium has been breaking down since the formation of the solar system. Does that make any sense? Thus, uranium and radon will continue to occur for millions of years at about the same concentrations as they do now. Now, radon is responsible for the majority of the mean public exposure to ionizing radiation, and it is often the single largest contributor to an individual's background radiation dose, and is the most variable from location to location. Radon gas from natural sources can accumulate in buildings, especially in confined areas such as attics and basements, and it can also be found in some spring waters and hot springs. But according to a 2003 report, the EPA assessment risks of radon in homes from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, evidence shows a clear link between lung cancer and high concentrations of radon. Oops. With 21,000 radon-induced US lung cancer deaths per year, second only to cigarette smoking, which is not correct. Smoking was the previous fear-based illness prior to COVID, remember. 21,000 radon-induced lung cancer deaths in the US per year. Thus, in geographic areas where radon is present in heightened concentrations, radon is considered a significant indoor air contaminant, which actually proves the folly of lockdowns being far more dangerous than going outside. And EPA estimates that your home is 5 to 8 times more contaminated than outside. Like I said, perspective. So that was back in 2003, 21,000 radon-induced lung cancer deaths per year. It is now 30,000 American deaths per year, which far exceeds the numbers of the COVID scam, and yet little is done or said about it. Where is the fake national media and government outcry over this? And what about the outcry over the third leading cause of death of Americans being medical malpractice? Why weren't they interested in Americans' health when 20 to 30,000 are dying from this gas? Like I said, perspective. We're going to cover a small excerpt of a book about Navy SEALs, which highlights something we've said quite often in our show. But the SEALs may be the only pop culture heroes to emerge from the disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, because they're the guys who killed Osama bin Laden, or so we are told. In reality land, bin Laden died of kidney failure in December 2001, so that ends that nonsense. But in blockbuster movies and best-selling books such as American Sniper and Lone Survivor, they battle not only a ruthless enemy but also risk-averse generals, which is correct, incompetent politicians, which is even more correct, and an indifferent citizenry. Now, the article said America might have lost its post-9/11 wars, but the SEALs won theirs, at least in their memoirs and also at the movies. But more quietly, the conventional Army and Marine Corps units in Afghanistan and Iraq often told a different story of the SEALs' exploits. In their version, the shadowy special operators swooped into villages at night with little warning, knocking down doors, killing civilians and creating new enemies who mounted even more furious attacks on the US troops that were left behind to clean up their mess. And David Phillips' Alpha, Eddie Gallagher and the War for the Soul of the Navy SEALs draws a bit from both of these narrative traditions. And the core of Phillips's book is Special Operations Chief Eddie Gallagher, who's a senior enlisted SEAL, an anti-hero who is portrayed as possessing almost superhuman powers. Possibly a super soldier program then. And in Phillips' telling, Gallagher is a narcissistic sociopath with ice blue eyes who opens fire on old men and little girls. And the Navy's failed attempt to convict him of murdering a badly wounded Islamic State war prisoner during the 2017 battle for Mosul, and a crime that Gallagher seemed to brag about in text messages, results in not only his acquittal, but also forced the resignation of the Secretary of the Navy. I guess that guy is a high-level program member then, based on that exchange. But Phillips' book raises an uncomfortable question. What if the SEALs are terrible at their jobs? And SEAL leaders chose Gallagher's Alpha platoon for the mission to liberate Mosul from the Islamic State because they believed that the unit and Gallagher were amongst the Navy's best. But in combat, Gallagher and Alpha platoon were a disaster. And rather than focusing on the enemy, Gallagher's men felt obligated to fire warning shots at women and children in an attempt to keep them away from their chief, who said they tried to kill just about every civilian who wandered into his rifle sight. And Phillips describes the pressure that weighed on Special Operator First Class Dylan Dillay as he sought to protect Iraqis from his boss. And he said it was exhausting, the tension of being forced to fire at people to make them flee in terror without accidentally killing them left him covered in sweat. Yet another myth exploded about the American military and their non-heroic exploits. It's all based on lies. And it's largely another reason, apart from the drugging, why most American servicemen are not allowed back. They're just sent on another tour in case they talk. And in reality, American soldiers are told to stir up the war, not diffuse it. And yet for that they are given badges of dishonour and worshipped by a gullible public who are criminally short of knowledge on these matters. And in the future, the real truth must be told, and less of this Hollywood-based heroic American military bullshit. There's nothing heroic about killing people, particularly people who have not attacked you. Now, the shambolic ways of the US military has been laid to bear for the world to see with the events surrounding Afghanistan. They failed to stop the bombing, then launch a missile strike on an alleged bomb plot which ended up killing 10 civilians from one family, and the Pentagon said they didn't know when the evacuations would be finished. Are they telling us, after being there for 20 years, they never had an exit strategy? Seriously? 20 years and no exit strategy. We are paying the DoD $1 trillion a year, and they can't formulate a simple plan other than to blitz innocent people and their infrastructure from 30,000 feet. Or is it unfolding as I warned a few years ago, where I said they would all be replaced? Make them look incompetent on a global scale, scale back their involvement, gradually replace them with their technology and close them down, just like what happened with the British and Dutch military groups of the past. And it's time to rethink military strategy and stop using it as a harvesting group to bully countries out of resources and fair elections, and develop of a proper military of defence, not attack, and then combine it into a globally equal military in defence of the planet, not for the benefit of greed-based psychopathic overlords. Now, John Kirby at the news conference said this: "Make no mistake, no military on the face of the earth works harder to avoid civilian casualties than the United States military, and nobody wants to see innocent life taken." Really? Do you really think we're all that stupid, Mr. Kirby? Hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq just to capture one man, possibly as many as 2 million to capture one man and a band of criminals funded by an agency on our own soil, and you think that is avoiding casualties? And what about the hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans killed by so-called friendly fire? Did you work hard on that? You know, this is child-level thinking. And it's not an Xbox game. This is real life. And the US military have shown they have no value in life whatsoever, including their own soldiers. Corrected, soul dyers. In this past week, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, who stood up at great personal risk to himself, and he and other Marines are pissed off at senior leaders' lack of planning, strategy, and more importantly, accountability for their mistakes. And one hopes that the clown bullies don't make an example of him, because the man spoke the truth. And all this as the US Army is looking for recruits for internment resettlement specialists. Why not just call it as it is? Gulag bullies. And the American people need to turn on the US military, and quickly, not the soldiers. And perhaps it's fitting to mention George McGovern, who was fiercely anti-war through the 1960s and 70s, who said this in Congress: "Every senator in this chamber is partly responsible for sending 50,000 young Americans to an early grave, and this chamber reeks of blood. Every senator here is partly responsible for that human wreckage at Walter Reed and Bethesda Naval and all across our land, young men without legs, arms, genitals, face or hopes. There are not very many of these blasted and broken boys who think this war is a glorious adventure. Do not talk to them about bugging out or national honour or courage. It does not take any courage at all for a congressman or a senator or a president to wrap himself in the flag and say we are staying in Vietnam because it's not our blood that is being shed. But we are responsible for these young men and their lives and their hopes. And if we do not end this damnable war, those young men will someday curse us. Our pitiful willingness to let the executive carry the burden that the Constitution places on us." And in a retort to the powerful Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman John Stennis suggesting that US troops might have to return to Cambodia, McGovern declared, "I'm tired of old men dreaming up wars for young men to fight." I'm tired of old men dreaming up wars for young men to fight. 50 years later, that still applies. And therein lies the problem. Old, mind-controlled puppets at the highest offices of the military commit young people to their deaths, harm and drug addiction, and it's high time it was stopped. And it's high time the American people stop praising war efforts and learn to accept and work towards peace efforts, because that is the adult thing to do.